Good morning. My name is Sharon Sobotta. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm very happy to be able to share perspective with you today. To say that the world is a tough place to navigate right now feels like an understatement. There are some 172,000 homeless or unhoused people in California alone, and that's more than any other state in the country. California has an incarceration rate of 549 per 100,000, which means that we lock up more people than any other democracy in the world. There's a war where more than 10,000 Palestinians and more than 1,000 Israelis have died in the last month alone. In my own family, my children's paternal grandfather is on life support in South San Francisco after enduring a series of strokes while in the hospital with nuanced symptoms. He was carrying the stress of falling months behind on rent, and like many Californians, living in the throes of housing insecurity, along with my children's paternal grandmother. This is the juxtaposition of the stats and the stories of the world that we live in. How do we solve these issues? The truth is complicated and it's nuanced. While living in this world and interviewing thousands of people, I found that the more I learn, the more questions that I have and the more nuance I see. As I've been covering everything from war to substance dependency to housing to the housing crisis, I haven't been able to stop thinking about an interview that I did while covering the Oakland Psychedelic Conference when I was voluntold by my editor at the East Bay Express to do so. I interviewed this man named Maurice Bird, and what he does for his job is he goes into the field in a homeless or unhoused encampment, depending on the person you're speaking to, and he sets up a chair and talks with people about their substance use using a harm reduction model. He says very clearly, like his main thing that he fights for is helping people. He wants to kill all binaries. He says there's not problem people and other people, but rather people with problems. And he tries to work with people. He doesn't make them use a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather tries to meet them where they are on their journey. And so he might ask, instead of telling them that they have to be all the way clean before they reintegrate with their families or having them challenge that narrative, he might look at what does it look like to be sober enough to be with their families. And slowly but surely, using a harm reduction model, a lot of his clients will reduce or end their use altogether. While he's doing this work, he's talking with them about their ACEs, their adverse childhood experiences, because more than 75% of these people arrive in adulthood with them. And he does this because context matters. Since covering this story, my awareness of binaries and nuances have heightened, and I see binary language everywhere, including the last 3 days, I've gotten a poll in my text messaging saying, who are you more likely to vote for, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And I'm looking, and I can see a binary that I'm not happy about. I would like there to be multiple parties and multiple options. And I think what does it mean when we have just a binary system in our politics and in the way that we receive our news and our headlines and the way that we think about things? I've been watching the way that in our own state, excuse me, I'm going to refer back to my notes for a second. And I also think that this gives us an opportunity to think about what happens when we hold our own lawmakers accountable, even the ones that we voted into office, and demand that they too see the nuanced truth. I've been thinking about this while looking at things in our own state, that the state is proposing to take care of housing insecurity and homelessness, for one example, through the construction of tiny homes. And there's a bouquet of well-meaning mental health measures. And I've been thinking about why the context matters and why it's important to be talking to the people that we're going to be benefiting from these programs as the programs are coming into effect. For one example, California is looking at building tiny homes to kind of solve the encampment process or the problem. What isn't necessarily taken into account is that people in encampments are there in part for the community. In the event that anyone who has a struggle with substance dependency moves into a home or an isolated place, it can be deadly if they're still struggling with a substance dependency and there's nobody to give them Narcan in the event of an overdose. And lastly, sometimes the idea of giving up the vast sky that's full of camp and belongings, or the camp that's full of belongings, isn't appealing. So some people, even though they're offered this option, might opt out. There's SB 326, the Mental Health Modernization Act, and there's a new one called SB 43, the modernization of California's conservatorship program, which makes it easier for the state to conserve people struggling with mental health challenges or at risk for not being able to care for themselves. Now I'm going to tell you a story, now that I gave you the context. So in my building, there's this woman, a 62-year-old, who's a certified nursing assistant, and her name is Julia. She cares for an elderly, not very nice white woman whom I've watched verbally abuse most of her caretakers. The woman happens to have a nicotine addiction and doesn't like it, and she has a half a lung. She doesn't like it when they won't give her cigarettes. In another chapter of life, though, her caretaker, Julia, had experienced homelessness herself and substance dependency. She relied on programs like the Black Panthers Breakfast Program, the Healthy Babies Program, and her own mother to take care of her own children. Now, in this chapter of life, Julia's mother, whose name is Gaynell Hamilton, is conserved by the state of California. She's conserved because she's 85 years old, and when Gaynell was caring for her own mother and her late husband, and lost both of them as she was caring for them in the last stage of their life, she abandoned her house and went to live in a homeless encampment. And then she started bouncing around the state to visit all of her children, and nobody could keep track of her. And then they started to notice that something was wrong. It turns out that she has bipolar disorder, the same diagnosis that my late father had, and her children weren't equipped to take care of her. So then what they did is they agreed to conserve her so she could get the resources that she needed. And now the meds are ready, are in order, and she is stable mentally, but they're finding it really hard to unconserve or to get back guardianship of her mother. So I went with them to visit her, and on the day I went to visit Gaynell Hamilton, her son Robin walked in, and it was his very first day in the free world. He'd been incarcerated for the past decade. And the mom, Gaynell, started shaking, and she was saying, "I'm blessed." She said it over and over, and she kept hugging her baby boy, who's now in his 50s, and she's saying, "Now I'm ready to go home." She kept repeating this. Her daughter said, "Well, we're working on it, Mama, we're working on it." But the problem is the finish line keeps moving, and Gaynell has a finite amount of time in the world. So she's an example. This is an example of the nuanced truth and the ironies of the world. Well, this woman, Julia, is taking care of an elderly woman in Lafayette. Her own mother is conserved and not able to be cared for by her family members. I don't have the answers. I only have the problems and questions, and I'm going to leave you with a few more. So why is it that activists have started reciting the disability slogan, "Nothing about us," without us, to lawmakers proposing one-size-fits-all solutions to homelessness and mental health measures in California? How will they work without the buy-in of people on the ground? Why in the United States, after a sentence has been served, do people continue to serve their time in the so-called free world when they carry the invisible asterisk of the criminal record with them when they apply for housing or jobs? And as I'll discuss in my perspectives column next week, you can read it in the East Bay Express, are California's well-meaning mental health and conservatorship ballot measures taking us in the right directions, or do they end up extending the intergenerational cycle of trauma and incarceration for Black, brown, and poor Californians? What would happen if we adjusted our approach to put an infrastructure of support for families on the front end? What would happen if we could accept that just as truth is nuanced, so are the solutions to any given problem? I invite you to keep this in mind when you watch, read, or listen to the news. Notice when words are being used or omitted, whose voices are included and whose are not. And if things seem a little too simple, look deeper. Do this while remembering Audre Lorde's quote, "There's no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not live single-issue lives."